Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Cybrary podcast. I'm your host, Mike Gruen, VP of Engineering and CISO here at Cybrary. And today we're joined by Ryan and Travis from Haekka and Jonathan Meyers, Principal Engineer at Cybrary. Jonathan, do you want to give a quick intro and then let our guests join in?
Yeah, so I'm Jonathan Meyers. You may have heard me before on the podcast. I'm the Principal Infrastructure Engineer here at Cybrary. So I'm responsible for all of our cloud infrastructure and protecting and defending that cloud infrastructure from all you learners out there trying to take down the site. Today we have Travis and Ryan from Haekka. I'll pass it over to you, Travis, for a quick introduction, then over to Ryan.
Hey, thanks for having us, guys. We're really excited to get on today with you. So I'm Travis Good. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Haekka. And our mission at Haekka is to reinvent security awareness training for modern work. I'll hand it over to Ryan from here.
Yeah, cool. My name is Ryan Rich. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Haekka. Excited to talk about whatever's in store, cybersecurity, I suppose. So.
Yeah. Why don't we start, Travis, with like a quick background? How did you guys kind of come to the IA training space? Like it's kind of not a super common thing that people tend to go towards. I think there's only like a handful of companies that kind of do it, and then even less that do it like well. So it's like an interesting space. So I'm curious how you kind of made your way to that space.
Yeah. So if you asked like teenage Travis what he wanted to be when he grew up, he probably wouldn't have said this. But even if you ask 20-year-old, 25, 30-year-old Travis, he wouldn't have said this either. But the reason why we're in this, the reason why we're in this space, and the reason why Ryan and I really are passionate about this, is that we experienced the pain of this firsthand. So at our last company, was a company called Datica, and we had built a HIPAA compliant, high trust certified platform as a service on top of AWS. So we wanted to make it easier for startups and some innovation centers to be able to deploy compliant workloads. And despite being focused on security and on compliance and modern technologies, what we discovered is our employees continually had just questions every day about what they were doing. Like, could they share this log file in a Zendesk ticket? Could they share this information in a Slack channel? How do they configure new users on, whatever, fill in the blank as a service? And we actually wrote and open sourced our own training materials. And then on like a lot of companies on a quarterly basis, we would do security and privacy lunch and learns for our employees or for specific groups and departments. We felt like the reason we had to do that is there wasn't anything that really fit well with our company, our workforce, and the way that we were working, which, in 2013 to 2015, having a fully cloud-based distributed team was a lot less common than in 2021 when everybody looks like that. And so, we really wanted to solve that problem for ourselves. And then, after leaving that last business, figure out a way to solve that for more people. So that's how, long-winded way of saying or talking about how we got into it, because it definitely wasn't something that I think either of us started our careers thinking we do.
I think the most unique thing about how you guys were operating was that the people at your company were asking questions on whether or not it was okay to do this or okay to do that. I think that's what really sets you apart.
You mean some people would just go and do stuff? I mean,
well, I guess some of the assumption baked into that was if people were asking, there were probably like 20 that weren't. So there had to be even more lack of knowing than what we were actually hearing about.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, and it's like super interesting because I remember a lot of the back in 2015, 2016, like most of the IA training that I would go through in like very large banks was like just go sit in this auditorium like when you're onboarded and once a year, and then just have somebody just click through PowerPoint slides. And I think that's how they like blanket did everything. And so I remember like onboarding, and it was just like the first 3 days you just go to this auditorium and they would just like click through PowerPoint slides. And it's an auditorium that's always too cold or too hot. And so you're just like falling asleep. Like it's impossible to stay awake. And so
my
super
experience was
interesting.
at least that it was PowerPoints that were delivered directly to me, so I could sit at the comfort of my own laptop and click through PowerPoints that were no longer relevant and out of
And
date.
pretend like you're reading them. Yeah, I mean, it's different training, but I think like when Travis and I were at Datica, like, and we first started to think about, what types of, training do we need for, HIPAA compliance and privacy and security, and like some of the examples online. I mean, granted, yes, fax machines are still used in the majority of like health systems, but trying to adapt that material to like a digital health company that is not using a fax machine. I mean, some of this content is just so far out of date that, you kind of just need to start from scratch in a lot of cases.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I remember the fax machine training as well. And I was at a company where we were dealing with health records, and customers were faxing us their like beneficiary roles with
Their
like
PHI.
social security numbers.
I think that's still a thing though, right? Like that's
There's like fax APIs for like actual software, and I mean, it's like, it's a problem for sure.
I think we had a customer that wanted us to fax them something, or they needed to fax us something to validate that we were a real company.
Sounds right.
It was a hardship. We don't have an inbound fax
anymore. We did it our last space, but we killed that. What was that? Like a year ago?
Yeah.
In any event, we should probably move on to the actual security training. So, like, what do you guys think like sets you sort of apart, or like what's a real like differentiator from your perspective?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, I mean, Travis and I are coming to the problem, from a very, specific perspective where, we've ran a company before, and we tried to model the product and the content, around what we would have wanted to take, and the product that we would have wanted. And really, where that starts, and this is definitely all credit to Travis, was delivering the content in Slack. And so, that's kind of the concept of the initial concept of Haekka was, how do we take, not just, security awareness training, but, HIPAA privacy training, GDPR training, CCPA, PCI, all these regulations, and deliver that to employees in a way that isn't disruptive. From a startup perspective, we wanted to get into the market super quick. So, building out like, kind of like a big LMS or a big web product wasn't really, in the cards for us. Starting with Slack is nice because you get, kind of your employee base is already there. They're already using it. You can utilize a lot of the, the UI that, Slack provides. So it kind of just made sense. And, I think that at least from my perspective, I wasn't necessarily super convinced that this was like really a market. But if you look at the world, I mean, most companies are either using Slack or Microsoft Teams. I mean, there's really not a lot of companies that don't fit into one of those buckets. So it was just a matter of kind of convincing those people that, Slack was a good delivery mechanism for training, and kind of take into the fact that most security awareness training has super low NPS from an employee perspective. I think anytime you can kind of improve that employee experience, it is kind of a benefit to the admins as well, the people that are assigning the training. So that's kind of like our biggest differentiator is really in how we deliver it. Now, how that kind of extrapolates to other products and services. I mean, our goal is to really be like a headless security awareness training platform, meaning we want to deliver security content to employees when and wherever they are. So that could be, in a Chrome extension, it could be real-time training, in Gmail. It could be, integrations into SaaS tools. Travis brought up one of the examples from our previous company where, we would constantly get like, PHI sent to us and PII sent to us in support tickets. And so being able to identify, those types of issues and give employees real-time feedback and really operationalizing policies and standard operating procedures such that those employees are able to kind of make the decisions that they need to make in real time, and not necessarily, forcing them to kind of go dig through a ton of material, or ask a question that doesn't get answered for a few days, stuff like that. So really kind of identifying where employees need training and delivering it in that exact spot.
I think that also opens up an interesting thing, because as we were talking about before, where it's sort of sometimes the customers are the ones who are sending the information, right? It's like they've done something, and now what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're responding in a way that's both appropriate as a, but also educational to them. Like, hey, maybe next time don't send this information in a support ticket. We have these other mechanisms for you to give us that information or whatever. So I think from that perspective, there's also I think a lot of opportunity because, end user, our staff talking to customers, you want to make sure that you sort of play that right and consistent and so on and so forth. So
yeah, totally. I mean, we've even
interesting.
seen customers, now with a lot of new Slack functionality around Slack Connect, where, various different organizations can kind of connect all of their chats together. With our service, you can assign training to, subcontractors, contractors, even just independent, third parties that, have access to your Slack. Haekka can send them training and, send them customer specific training or, whatever you want to send them. We probably have a piece of content for it. So yeah, that's certainly an angle. Yeah.
That's cool. I think one of the other, like, as someone who runs our security awareness, and I think the hardest part for me is not so much in the delivery. Like, we've got that. It's it's on a cadence. It's more on my administrative capability of I have to drop what I'm doing. If I want to see how things are going, I have to go into a system. Whereas I'm sure you guys probably have some Slack commands or something along those lines that probably make checking up on how, compliancy things are people actually complying with the program probably a lot more real time and not something I have to go and do.
Yeah, totally. Travis, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we try. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, and Ryan focused a lot on this. There's a focus on delivering content within the context of the work that learners are doing, right? So making it easier to actually take the training. But from an administrative standpoint, we're also trying to leverage and automate, because we hear this a lot, whether it's nudging for reminders or just kind of checking up on status of things, right? And so we do actually build a lot of that into Slack. So just the way that Slack apps work now, even just within the the app home screen, so just kind of clicking on the Haekka icon in Slack, you can see a summary of all your assigned trainings. You can see the percent completed. You can download evidence. You can kind of do all that right there in the training, and we're trying to do more of that and build out more of that functionality around, not just, relevant metrics to the training itself, but also, risk-based metrics based on, individuals, based on groups, and even based on some of the applications as we integrate with applications beyond Slack. So we look at things like Zendesk or via Chrome extension, things like the AWS console or Silicon Valley Bank, or, all these other different things that we're looking at, and to build out, certainly more, I don't like the word robust, but I guess maybe it works here, like robust type profiles at different levels within the company, from individual to application up to through groups and company level. So yeah, and we want to make it something that you don't have.
So
what
I hear you saying. So what I hear you saying is you're leveraging the Slack to shift the paradigm and really make a more robust solution. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. Change the game a bit. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about tying into, say, Slack groups, and maybe even being able to look at Slack channels and other things to sort of help inform the awareness training, and the awareness training to use that information to potentially do, I can see the back and forth between those two things, and being able to maybe even real time get in there. We've shifted over to using knowledge bases that are integrated right into Slack, right, where people can ask questions and the bot will answer and stuff like that. And so I can see a very, very, very similar here, but a little more training oriented than just answering the question.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty interesting because it works for, in our use case, it's very interesting, I think, because our security team is relatively small. So it's everybody on this podcast today. So for us to kind of check up on all of these portals and validate who's doing well and things like that, we have to go log in. And then second of all, we're still a relatively small company, under 100. And so like we know people's names, and like I can see their name and know exactly what department they're in, right? Like, but I can see this as you get to like larger and larger companies, like I start to see these names popping up that are kind of hitting positive and like, hitting some risk threshold. And I have no idea what their department they're in, right? So they could be in a low risk, department like engineering, where it's like, okay, yeah, like that's kind of easy to control. They're not interfacing with customers. But then when you start to talk about like finance people or marketing people that have access, or salespeople that have access to, the sales forces of the world and things like that, that makes it very difficult for us to kind of like triage and like, where do we need to spend our time? Like, where should we be focused? And, sometimes it'll take us half to a full day to kind of like go through some of these reports and figure out like, okay, cool. Like, where's our highest risk areas? Where's our lowest risk areas? And like trying to do that, takes us out of the fight per se for the day doing, our other jobs that, we kind of have to do at startups. So that's super interesting how it kind of, just lets me know, it's almost like the infrastructure world where we've started migrating from like these great log aggregators and things like that to where we're kind of just alerting on things we need to know about. Like everything else is kind of just like noise. I don't need to know about it. Like I just need to know about certain things like that are important, or that, I deem important, or things like that. So
yeah, we've gotten a lot of similar feedback. I mean, I think once you get to a certain size, you basically, if you're going to kind of fully like use those metrics and make them actionable, you almost need like a hire to do it. And so we've gotten a lot of that feedback. So, our goal longer term, is to be like really intelligent in that way, where we're automatically, kind of assigning that risk, and then starting to make some of those decisions, where you don't have to even look at the dashboards and the metrics to know kind of where to target this training. Based on these risk scores, or we know based on these risk scores, that these are the people that need this additional training. They need to be enrolled in, whatever it might be, and being able to do that in an automated way, because it is just, I mean, like I said, unless you're going to hire like a full-time security, trainer, manager, right? And at some point, that's justified, but you need some way to automate that and make that easy for you. And so that is our goal to have people, hire us as a product to kind of solve that.
Yeah, I think that fits into the themes of like kind of how we approach things at Cybrary. It's like we'd rather pay some software to do it and then just kind of alert a key set of people, because we'd almost, I think in larger companies too, especially, there's a bunch of shortage in like cybersecurity personnel. And it's like, if I could save a person from just reading reports and like generalizing and, making intelligence out of those reports, like I'd rather pay somebody that can defend my network or do other things like that are more impactful. Well, not more impactful, but like more hands-on, like that actually takes something that a human can like decide and decipher and do things like that. So,
well, I mean, that's sort of what artificial intelligence is, right? It's just automation. It's a bunch of if statements. We all know it's not real intelligence. But the more we can automate, the more we can focus humans on actual, on other higher order problems, the more we can get the machine to solve problems that machines are well suited to solve.
Yeah, exactly.
Like monotonous, like math.
Like that basic stuff. Yeah, and I mean, your log example is a good one, because it's it's kind of a signal to noise thing, and you get above 100 employees, and there's a lot of potential signel, right? And you're just looking at one subset of it, probably, with whatever you're looking at today in terms of like training. I think as you start to collect and start to gather more like human risk data or application risk data, based on human actions, then you get even more noise, right? And so you need to figure out where that signal is. So I do think that analogy like works pretty well when it comes to human risk. Just the log analogy works really well in that context.
Yeah. I mean, there's all these reports that keep coming out saying like humans are the greatest risk cybersecurity wise in an organization, like hands down. And then at Mike and I's previous company, we did a bunch of like data analytics on like emails, like phone transcripts, chat transcripts, all that kind of stuff. And that was noise, right? And so trying to like narrow those things down was what we built a platform on top of to kind of like bubble these things up, because we understood that like people are risk. And then I think the unknown risk, or like the biggest issue that I think you guys are solving, is like these things are changing like all the time. Like most people haven't read the CCPA, the California whatever thing. Like, yeah, like I don't even know the name of it. And like I've read it, but like there's so many things that are like popping up. Like GDPR was like nuts. And so I think a lot of companies are struggling to kind of keep up because it's effectively a new hire to kind of read, parse, and then like understand what's happening there. And so being able to kind of like take those in like bite-sized chunks like helps a lot because, understaffed, and then it's like bubbling up the lowest risk because like, the standard sales employee or marketing employee, they're not reading these regulations, right? They're just like, oh, that's some nerd
nor
thing.
should they. I mean, like, let's,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, like, right. Like that's, and I think that's what Jonathan was hitting on earlier is like the engineers who have the most access are actually the easiest for us to control because we control their access. We control all of these things, but it's the sort of employees on the edge that are actually, they're just trying to do their job, and we want to make it possible for them to do that job and not have to think everything all through. And so I think that's, again, security awareness is an important part. I think it's really hard to tell people, oh, just be vigilant all the time. Don't click on links. Like, oh, if you don't recognize the email address, who the sender is, don't open the email. I'm in sales. Like, what do you think I'm going to, like, it's an inbound email. Like, I have to open it.
But don't click the link and then fill out your password, don't you?
And I think it's like, it's almost like the context, right? Like, what do I need to know about these regulations in the context of my job? Right? Like it's all I care about. Like I don't need to read like 9,000 pages of filler that people add to fluff, right? Like it's like when you write your college English papers, it's like 90% fluff to make it seem like you're talking formal and all this other stuff. And it's like, well, no, just give me like the 4 sentences of like what the key things are, right? Like I just want the thematic intent of this like document. Like just give it to me.
There was a great document, or I guess you'd call it like a blog post or a guide that came out a couple years ago when GDPR went into effect, and it was like GDPR for product managers. And it basically cut it down to like, here's literally what you need to do for your product in order to comply with GDPR. And I think that's like just that concept, but apply that to say, sales, marketing, whatever else. That's the type of content that we are writing and will continue to write. I mean, because if you try to read some of this stuff, I mean, it's worse than like, your English paper, right? It's literally just lawyer jargon. And so like, even to understand what some of it is, you'd need, at least like somewhat of a law degree.
Like an IV of caffeine to stop you from falling asleep. Like,
And then there's all the other problems because it's ambiguous. I think GDPR in particular, this is my standpoint, this is my opinion. I'll state my opinion. The GDPR was intentionally written ambiguously because they want it to apply to the world. And so it's not really clear, does this apply to people in the EU, citizens of the EU, people traveling through the EU at the time, all of these different things. And so I think, the more we can sort of distill things down, and I think the other aspect is, okay, so take that blog post, for example, it does a great job of boiling down GDPR for product managers. And I'm sure we could do a similar GDPR for marketing and a GDPR for sales. But then you have GDPR, you have CC, whatever, the California one, you have HIPAA, you have all the different ones. And so somebody who can sort of aggregate that all together and just give me the sales, like just give me based on my domain, based on what I need to do. Like, and I don't even need to know, does this come from GDPR? Or does this come from some US law? I just need to know, what can I do? What can't I do? And be done with it, given my role. And so, organizations that can help with that are critical, especially in this ever changing. And as with GDPR, I'm just waiting for lawsuits, right? Like, and same thing with the California one. Basically, lawsuits are what's going to decide what the actual law is, which is unfortunate and a whole nother problem. But that's what happens when you have laws written by lawyers. That's just my feeling.
No. I mean, that's what's going to interpret them, essentially, and make them actionable. And so, I agree with you. And the challenge at this point is for companies, and to Ryan's point about the blog post for product managers. I mean, it's at this point, and the challenge for us, and we try to do this in like a light touch way, is to do some interpreting, right? Like, because your support folks do need to understand some amount of like data subject rights issues. If you're working, if GDPR is relevant to you, right, and you're working with folks in the EU, and so how do you kind of distill that down and to some degree, interpret what can be interpreted? Because it's. I agree with you. You do have to it is going to be interpreted based on the lawsuits and things like that. But like at some point, like there needs to be something actionable, today pre-lawsuit that people have to work with.
Right.
So we're trying to start to scratch the surface and solve that. But it's even for a company that's focused on that, for us, that's challenging to do because there is just so much out there, both in terms of regulations, but then in terms of specificity based on job function. It's kind of incredible, actually.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't doubt it because I've been trying to distill it for our team, and same thing. It was just there's just mountains of information, and I know specific and I'm trying to go all the way down to like the technology level, right? Like we use these various third party SaaS, and it's like, oh, is this just used for support purposes? In which case we can put PI in there, or is this like used for tracking? Is it like there's all like it's so subtle and difficult.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a challenge, and it's a challenge everybody's facing. So we're trying to do our part to help.
So I tried to push really hard for us just to cut off the EU, but that didn't fly.
We almost did it.
We almost did EU firewall. Yeah,
just like we'll just take the hit, until we can figure it out. I think it's super interesting what you guys are talking about, like how you're talking about more Chrome extension and like kind of like this context like of where you're at and things like that. It seems like a better way of doing what people have been screwing up for the last 5-10 years now. When we saw the recent one, we saw the recent one with the phishing emails, right? Where it's like the UK train company was like sent a phishing scam out to people and was like, oh, thanks for working through the COVID pandemic. Here's a bonus. And then they just like punished everybody for clicking the link, and it's like, I feel like something needs to change because I feel like we see these like every year pop up and nobody's really learning. Like some guys like, oh, I'm going to get him, and it's.
Well, I mean, truthfully, to give, we talk a lot about it, and you mentioned it too. Like, I mean, there's all these reports: employees, human risk, employees at risk, human vulnerability, all these words. To get back a little to the employees. I mean, they're constantly under attack, right? Whether it's via phishing. I mean, it's and kind of what we're putting on them. Like as we push more control down in terms of what they can do in these tools, in terms of just functionality, but then also configuration, and then just the sort of consistent onslaught. Like if you make this mistake, it'll cost us, and you don't even know it's a mistake yet. I mean, it's a really challenging environment to work in, and so and so leveling that playing field is hard. I mean, you open an email. No matter who you are, right? You could be a security person. You open an email while you're in a rush at 6 a.m. when you're trying to run out of the office or whatever, wherever you are. Like you're not thinking about like, let me inspect this domain. You're just thinking about how do I work my way through this inbox.
Well, and I think that's my feeling is when it comes to like awareness training, stuff like that, it should really focus more on the after action. Like, what do you do? Like, it's not so much, don't click these links. Like, it's impossible. I went to a great Black Hat talk about, it was a security researcher who hired a company to phish her. And she's like, I knew for the next 4 weeks I was going to be under attack. And I knew there was going to be like 4 of them. And she knew everything needed to know to defend herself. And yet she fell for 3 out of the 4 attacks, right? Like, because it's almost impossible to be vigilant. And the more important part is what do you do in the, like knowing what to do if you did fall victim, as opposed to feeling like getting punished for not, for doing whatever. And I know like there was a company I worked at where I was using a Mac. They were mostly Windows based. And I got like punished with additional hours of training because I didn't report a phishing email. But that's because there was no way for me to report it. I saw the email. I was like, oh, that looks like a thing that I'm just going to delete and ignore, which seemed like the reasonable thing to do. But apparently I should have like reported it, even though I don't have that capability in my
in your
email
Outlook
client. Yeah. Well, I wasn't running Outlook. And so, but in any event, but that's the type of thing, is just like more positive reinforcement for doing the right thing, or, we're all going to fall victim. Like there's nothing you can do, and you shouldn't feel bad or beat yourself up. Yes. Try to avoid it as much as possible, but like, let's not focus on punishing people or making them feel dumb for falling for things.
And it can kind of have an opposite effect. I mean, we talked to a lot of different companies, and we've had some that are like, hey, how do I get people to stop reporting legitimate emails as spam? they're like, we send out internal emails all the time, and like 50% of them get reported as spam. And I was like, what are you guys writing in those emails? Are you are you offering like employee gift cards? And he's like, yeah, actually, I think one was like an employee.
Well, we had a similar thing where somebody because we use Slack for all internal communications. We like internal email. Like I'm a dictator and like will come down on people for doing it. And so like the one time we did send some like emails with like, hey, here's a gift card or whatever. I think there were a couple people who reported it as spam.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like a DoorDash gift card or something. Like,
Yeah,
it was like,
DoorDash.
hey, thanks for like, I know we're all remote now. Like, treat yourself to lunch, And it was like, oh, no.
Yep.
Yeah.
Click this link, fill out your information, and we'll send you a DoorDash gift card.
And then I think another thing that like we don't really talk about a lot for like these employees that are on the front lines is the availability to like sensitive data and just analytics that you didn't have 5 years ago. And I don't think people understand like how, I don't want to say like sensitive, but like important and like, in the grand scheme, if somebody were to get this data, like it seems very important, but to you, it's just like, oh, they clicked on this link. Like you just have like user actions on your web page and you're like, oh, that's not really important. But like, as you start to get more and more data that, I guess is tracking people per se, because you can connect the dots, that people just I don't think people like innately understand like, oh, this is like super sensitive data, because in their mind, oh, it's not a credit card number. It's not a social security number. It's not like email, phone number, anything like that. It's more of like this higher level data that you can use in aggregate to kind of, do some things. And I don't think we don't really identify that as well as we should. And then it just gets easier and easier, right? Like we have data lakes that people have access to, that just contain like everything. And people are like, oh, I'm going to make a report and I'll just export it, and it's like,
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, it's stuff that, it is stuff that's like, seemingly for your, for people's specific job function, seemingly super benign, right? Like dumping a report from a, data lake or dumping like a lead list from HubSpot or
Right.
Salesforce. You're just like, oh, I'll just dump it and put it here. And you're like, well, where? But yeah,
Right.
you don't, it's like, well, look, I need to put this into something so I can, run some analytics or some report or something on it where, on a platform I know. And yeah, it's really hard to kind of see the forest for the trees, because you just basically need some data from that lead list and you can't get it, easily, in the functionality of the app. And so, yeah, I totally get it. And that's a much harder problem to solve too, because how do you realize, how do you make people realize it's not even just like be vigilant? It's like, how do you enable people to do stuff in today's world where there's data everywhere, and do it in a way that doesn't put that data at risk?
Well, and the other aspect of it, I think, is things have changed because of the laws. So now all of a sudden there are substantial financial penalties. It's not just the risk of the data being breached, and we all agree we don't want that, and we don't want these email addresses out there.
Yeah.
But now the risk is so much higher because of GDPR and other laws, that like I think just talking to people who've been in the industry for a long time don't realize like, oh, yeah, I know you could do this 3 years ago and it wasn't that big a deal to dump that lead list into like a Google Sheet or an Excel file and just keep it on your hard drive. Like it wasn't that big a deal, but the laws have changed. And like now we can get like, that could be an out of business event. If something bad were to happen to that list. And so I think that's the other thing, is just like getting people to recognize that like, yeah, I know you've been doing this for 10 years and this is the way you've always done it, but like we're in a new world now where that's not okay. And that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those types of actions also promote like bad hygiene from those employees, like even for their own personal use. Like I was talking to somebody last week about an employee that like breached their social security number to all 2,000 internal employees because they put their W-2 on a shareable file within G Drive. Right. And they just thought they were like storing their W-2 like in G Drive, but it was like to a globally shareable directory. And like they didn't really know it at first. Right. But then like, then there's, their CISO had to like sit down and write, like some training on like, hey, here's stuff that we don't put in, even though you may have gotten your W-2 as a PDF in a G Drive folder that was specifically shared with you by HR, don't move it to this other one that has, where everyone has access.
Well, this is super interesting, right? Because it's like we're coming back around to like the first share drives that were around, like when I was in college, right? Like share drives were a thing. And it was like it took people like time to learn that like, oh, not every drive is the same. Like everybody can access these. And then we got rid of that for a while, right? Like share drives kind of went away in a lot of places. And, people these days don't have them because everything's in, Google and things like that. And so now we're back to like, oh, now we have shared drives again. Let's throw drive stuff back on there. So, and then I think another issue with like a lot of these data problems is some of the software like really hasn't caught up, right? Because they kind of do this like shared responsibility model where it's like, oh, we'll let you download the data, but once you do that, like that's on you, right? And it's like, well, marketing company X, you could just stop. You could create a role that doesn't allow certain employees to export data from your platform, right? Like that's the easy fix. So from like the IT side, we're trying to figure out like, well, how can we corral employees enough to not do bad things, right? But there's always new software and there's all this stuff that's out there and they don't all have the option. And it's not really something that IT can say like, no, we're not going to use this major marketing platform anymore because they allow you to export data, right? Like marketing lead's going to be like, no, we're still going to use this platform, right? And so it's that kind of like balance and catching all these like weird edge cases where it's super important because then, people are thinking about it like as they're doing it, even if it's not like at the front of their mind, they're like, hey, maybe this isn't right. I should go check with somebody. And I think that's the ultimate goal.
But the entire concept of like shared responsibility, like I get it, right? And I certainly get it, like from a cloud like infrastructure perspective, and then similarly like the example you gave, in terms of a SaaS shared responsibility model. At the same time, it's really like ultimately what you're saying is like individuals now have the power to do all these things, and like these companies that are hosting this aren't responsible. And so there's this kind of opaque shared response, which I get the need for it, but at the same time, it's pushed all the responsibility on the users and ultimately the companies that are paying for these platforms. And they're challenging enough for like IT people to understand when it comes to like a like a cloud shared responsibility model for AWS or Azure or GCP or whatever. But then you take that down to like a marketing manager or just a marketing person who's using these things to interpret like, oh, I get it. Like I click this link, I'm exporting this. Like this is now my responsibility. I mean, yeah, it's a whole can of worms that like I don't know what the cart before the horse, chicken egg problem, but there's a sequencing problem here, which is like very significant. I guess I hadn't thought about it as much in terms of the SaaS shared configuration. Ryan and I have a lot of experience with the sort of at our last company with the cloud, the shared responsibility models. But it's super interesting to think about that in terms of pushing down responsibilities and accountability and things like that to SaaS management. That's a whole nother can of worms.
I mean, the nice thing is, I mean, like from, it is truly a shared responsibility in the sense of like, okay, cool. They're going to make sure that they're responsible in theory for defending this against everyone outside of your organization. They're sort of promising we're only going to give access to you guys. However, that's where we're stopping and it's on you to figure it out the rest of the way. I just wish they gave us better tooling for managing that part of that responsibility. And in some cases, and I do recommend everybody really dig deep on any of the SaaS platforms because a lot of times what they sort of do or say, it's not truly shared. There's definitely gaps, and sometimes there's some information that maybe they're not really protecting as well as they should. I'm not going to point fingers, but you definitely just can't just take it for granted that they're going to do their job. But assuming that you do find some good vendors, like it's still, they're just not giving you all the tools you really need in order to help your users, your staff be, vigilant.
Or they charge you extra for it.
Yeah. Or they charge you extra for it.
That's the
are we going to talk? Are we going to jump up on SSO should be free by default?
It should be free by default. Everybody, we're past that point in life,
right?
Like
that's the one killer enterprise feature, though. How else will
Well, you probably shouldn't have an enterprise software company then if that's like your feature, right? Like that's the differentiator. Like we're past that point.
The one.
That's just my internal. That's Jonathan and I's soapbox. you don't have to jump on it if you don't want to. But
yeah, we're still at the point where we still have to fight that fight, and people are still like, but their software is so good. Like, we just need it. And we're all going to share a username and password. And you're just like, come on, people. Like, I can't help you here. It's like, you're like, oh, is it just one person on your team using it? No, we're going to share it with 30 people, and it's like, come on. And so I think Mike's been successfully at negotiating some companies to throw it in for free effectively because of certain things, but like nobody has that negotiating power. Like, come on.
Yeah.
But there are some new like data lakes out there, I guess, that have started getting to that point where it's like every individual record has like access control to it, which is good to see. Like companies like that kind of starting up and like taking market share away from the larger companies that just kind of like, oh, we just everything's the same. There's 3 set roles and that's it. It's admin, user, and reader.
Right.
And it's like that's the extent. You can't differentiate which customers they can see and things like that. So I'm glad that's kind of making it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Travis and Ryan, for joining us today. It was a great conversation. Mike always loves to get to talk to somebody else that believes in the IA training and things that he does. So fun discussions. Anything closing statements or anything you guys got?
Thank you guys. We love having the opportunity to connect with you guys and talk a bit about this stuff. And I think it's exciting times. A lot of stuff we talked about is stuff that I think is going to be changing as now every industry is essentially regulated because the data is all regulated. So it's going to be interesting to watch over the next 5 or 10 years the technology start to catch up. You can. If you guys are interested. The website is, it's Haekka, but I'll have to spell it. So it's HAEKKA.com. And so you can go there. You can actually download and install it and give it a run for free up to about 10 users. So a lot of security teams in larger companies will kind of test it internally, security or IT teams. And, then you can kind of deploy it across Slack, assigning stuff to channels or, however you want to assign stuff out. We'd love you to give it a try and love feedback on it.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time on the Cybrary podcast. Right. See you guys. Bye.